sponsored by Wendy's and the Wendy's app. Harman, I was getting criticized for reading the ads too fast. So I really slowed that one down, put a lot of emphasis because we love all our sponsors here on Canucks Convo. And we especially love Wendy's because they sponsor the Daily Faceoff Survivor Pool game. So as I said, fittingly, I'm not going to call you the nickname. You don't like that nickname, Frank. I won't do it. I don't.
No, but what is fittingly? Like, are you saying I look like I'm someone that eats at Wendy's often?
Maybe no, not. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to say that you're gonna make me say it. You're the daddy at Daily Faceoff, right? Daddy Faceoff. That's what we called you. You didn't like it, but you asked me to explain it, so I had to. You run Daily Faceoff. You're the head honcho there, so of course you're here.
Quads. When are we going to teach you to use your words more carefully?
Yeah, one day. Frank, Thatcher Demko on LTIR, I think you heard my explanation of it. Nothing there to read into. Like, I know some Canucks fans are worried about him missing the playoffs, anything like that. Like, do you know any indication if there's been a setback, anything like that?
No. This is purely a cap machination. They were looking for a little bit extra flexibility. They get that now, and they have a pretty good sense of the timeline of when Demko is going to be back. They obviously want to get him a couple regular season games before heading into the playoffs. April 6th or beyond will allow for that. And right from the very initial instance, there was never really any concern of, this is a significant injury. It's going to cost him momentous times of the season. Nothing like that. So I think the Canucks are pretty confident. And look, you never know how these things go in the sense that timing, rhythm, all that. Will it be helpful, hurtful? There's probably cases to make for both. Me personally, given the lifting that Demko has done this season, I would look at it if he is truly healthy in a real positive way that your goalie is going to be one of the most fresh heading into the postseason.
Do you have any indication of what's going on with Lindholm? Is there any concern about his potential playoff availability?
I have less insight on Lindholm. Don't really know what exactly the issue is. Have some ideas, wouldn't want to speculate. And I think there's more of an unknown. I think it's obviously something that he can try and, power through and play through. The other part of that is it feels like he's less than optimal and not at his best. So that part is tough. And I saw some Canucks fans on social media saying, hey, you got to go back to Calgary and review the medical records when this trade was made. I don't think that has anything to do with it. Medical records are shared typically before a deal is made and questions are asked. So don't think there's anything to that front, but what it may do is at least offer some explanation into the game that we've seen from Lindholm to this point.
Frank, what can you tell us about this story you wrote yesterday about the salary cap? It could have been higher this season, has to do with escrow and stuff. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so without having everyone's eyes glaze over on a complicated issue, basically the long and short of it is this year, as part of the MOU, players had 6% of their paychecks withheld. And given that league revenue is on track for $6.2 billion this year, the players are on track, if that number is accurate, to get upwards of half of that back. So potentially 3% of their income back to them well after the season's over and the final accounting is done. And the reason why the cap could have been higher is, as also part of this deal, the players had to pay back $50 to $75 million to finish off the debt that they owed owners from the pandemic losses. And the thought process is the PA went to the league and said, hey, we'd like to try and increase the cap this season, beyond $83.5 million. What can we do? And the league said, well, we could do that. We're happy to do it, but we would need you to withhold more pay in escrow to ensure a 50-50 split. And the players had presented some math saying, look, like this cap is artificially low relative to revenue based on the way the system is set up. Can we find a way to increase this cap even just a little bit more? And the league had said, yeah, but you got to give us something in return. And the player said, no, this 6% is what we negotiated. This was the win for us in this CBA. This was how a lot of players structured and negotiated their deals to take the most amount of money these years of the CBA, because they knew that escrow was locked in at 6 and they didn't want to move off of that, which is why the cap ended up being 83.5 million. And unfortunately, because so many teams were tight to the cap, that actually resulted in the loss of about 25 full-time NHL jobs this year, because instead of 23-man rosters, which is the max, a lot of teams were forced to carry 21 or 22 and shuffle players back and forth, that it ended up resulting in less money in the system, less money for teams to spend, less jobs.
Frank, it looks like the Canucks are going to get Dakota Joshua back in the lineup soon. He's one of several UFAs that they have. When you think of Joshua, Bluger, even on the back end, Zadorov, Ian Cole, Casey DeSmith, on and on. I know it's super early, but do you have any early indication on which of these pending UFAs the Canucks are particularly high on in terms of the value that they bring to the team?
I think the first thing that they'd like to get done, which seems less and less likely to get finished off before this regular season concludes, is the Filip Hronek contract. We already did that last week. Don't worry, we're not going down that path again. You can just rewind to last week's episode if you want to hear my insight and info. But I do think that of that entire group that you listed, I think they really like what they've seen from Casey DeSmith, just in terms of having some stability at that position. Can you find someone maybe a little cheaper? Potentially. But it seems like him and Demko have gotten along pretty well too, which has been important. I think they value the intelligence of Teddy Bluger. And I obviously I think there's a connection between, or certainly one has grown between Rick Tocchet and Dakota Joshua. He's had a really solid season that he took a big step forward this year in terms of impact and consistency. So, I'd say those are the three guys that kind of stand out. Cole has been good. Cole has been kind of exactly what you'd want him to be. I think it's all going to come down to how they want to shuffle these dollars around.
I always wonder about this because we have these conversations and look, Frank, we've said it a few times. We think Filip Hronek's probably going to get paid a little bit too much money, but like a guy like Dakota Joshua, what does he get on the open market after the season he's having?
Probably like 275-ish, 2.5.
I think the Canucks pay for that. Like, my opinion, I think they should sign that.
It's hard for me to answer that in a vacuum because you have to shuffle a lot of pieces around in order to be able to, go from 800,000 to 275, for instance. And I mean, me personally, I like Dakota Joshua and I like the fit that he's been. But my thought process on bottom 6 forwards is, by nature, you should be able to coach and develop guys into those roles. And I always look at the Boston Bruins. I don't know why this is, but I think no team in the league does as good a job as finding fourth line players. Mm-hmm. And they basically come in, they mold them into a role. This seems to be an organizational philosophy. And then once it's time for a significant raise, they cut them loose. And I just I think when you look at some other players that have been through the Canucks of late, and even just saying this name is going to bother people, but you get locked into Tanner Pearson type contracts for guys that end up in your bottom 6, and you really start to hate your cap structure. You start to you're looking at it and you say, can we get the same production or close to it for closer to league minimum? That instead of just falling in love with guys, we should have just made the decision to say, what you did here was awesome. We loved every second of it. We'd love to keep you, but we can't afford you. And I wonder if that's the type of decisions that Vancouver is ultimately going to have to make. How can we go out and find the next one of these with our scouting eye that isn't going to cost us as much, where we can then take that money and slide it to the core players that we really need to pay, that are the engines that drive our team?
I absolutely agree. And I mean, you look at what Dakota Joshua was last year and even at the start of this year and how far he's come under Rick Tocchet. You have to hope that with your pro scouting and with your coaching staff that you're able to kind of go out and find the next Dakota Joshua. Okay, Frank, I wanted to ask you about this in Philly. John Torella, Sean Couturier, what's going on there? And then I saw Torella was apologizing for not answering a question about a goalie or something. What's going on in Philly?
Yeah, we're not going to relitigate the John Tortorella, Sean Couturier thing. He's back in the lineup. It seems like some fences have been mended. The reason why I had pointed out the Tortorella apology was that, look, if you're going to hammer this guy for the mistakes that he makes, you also need to give him some credit for stepping up and apologizing publicly on the way he basically portrayed his goalie's game after a totally innocuous question. And there's always emotion, there's frustration, competitive juices flowing. I think maybe John Tortorella more so than some other coaches, especially when you get them right after the game. And I would say that, look, it's funny. I have some, sort of criticism from a media perspective. Like if you took a step back and didn't go into the post-game press conference sort of with such apparent disdain for the media and the questions that you're going to get, maybe you wouldn't always respond so flippantly. And it was also kind of like tongue in cheek, where you apologized and said that it was a legitimate question in which you gave a flippant answer. Does that mean the rest of the ones are all stupid? I don't know. I mean, we could kind of we could have a field day and unpack it, probably unfair. But I just wanted to, at least with my tweet, to just say, hey, like it says a lot that you're gonna apologize. And I think a lot of this last 10 days for John Tortorella, unfortunately, has undone what has been a tremendous coaching job this season. Some would argue maybe the most difficult of his career, rebuilding team that he's squeezed every last drop out of, that is in a solid track, 70% shot to make the playoffs.
Speaking of the Eastern Conference playoff race, how is Washington in a playoff spot? Because they've got a minus 26 goal differential, one of the worst teams in the NHL at controlling 5-on-5 play, don't even have a point per game producer. How are they in a playoff spot? How do they keep winning?
Harm, the answer to your question, and I hear this goal differential thing a lot, is that they are selective in how they lose, if this makes any sense. So I'll throw the stat at you. 26 Caps regulation losses this year. 21 of them have been by 3 or more goals.
Wow.
I mean, that's your answer right there. Why is our goal differential so bad? It's because when you lose, you really freaking lose. But the rest of the time, it seems like, I mean, that's a huge chunk of the season, almost half of it. The rest of the time, they're actually somewhat decent.
I'm looking at the Eastern Conference playoff picture. It's looking like a sleepwalk to the finish line. Who gets the playoff spots? Who gets the playoff spots in the East, Frank?
So I think it's going to be the Caps. But here's my hot take, is that the Caps catch the Flyers and the Flyers end up in the second wild card spot.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, it's not really that hot of a take. They're only 1 point back. But
Yeah.
the Flyers have beaten some pretty good teams the last 10 days. The Bruins, they went to OT with the Canes. They beat the Leafs in regulation. Like, they've actually had a decent stretch of hockey where, I just, it's not like they're collapsing by any stretch. And the crazy part is, When you do the math, I think both teams are kind of on pace for like 91 or 92 points ish. Neither one of those teams needs to light the world on fire in order to do that and get in. You're talking like barely 500 hockey, 510 hockey down the stretch. 10 points out of their last 20-ish should get them in.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Sound logic. I like it, Frank. Thanks so much for doing this, and we will chat with you next week, and we'll be sure to ask you about Filip Hronek next week.
Too soon. See you guys.
Thank you, sir. Thanks. All right, there he is, Frank Seravalli. You can see him all over the place at dailyfaceoff.com. Got a few shows you can go check out as well. Yeah, good stuff over at Daily Faceoff with our pal Frank.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.